Welcome. So nice to see you, Mandy. And actually, we just ended up saying 30 minutes of joy and delight. And that's absolutely my intention for me today, for us during this conversation. And I just reflected before we got together just 5 minutes ago. And for me, you are such an incredible role model of audacious appreciation. You really are, that role model of what I would call extreme generosity almost. So I was reflecting on how much of what I'm doing, even this is due to a conversation that you and I and James had at the beginning of the year. You giving without even knowing when you give. That sort of unconditional giving is what I know you for. And I became a member of the 4PC because of you. And there are many more. So I was sort of thinking there are so many different things that I can think of you, but that is the audacious part of Mandy for me. It's the gratitude, the appreciation, the generosity. But I love for you to introduce yourself as well with something audacious about yourself.
Thank you for that introduction. Something audacious. I think I've become much more comfortable in my own skin when I've allowed all of the seemingly mismatching parts of myself to be able to come and play together. That it means that I have a very kind of critical, geeky, dorky academic part, so I can be very serious, but I also have a very playful part. Um, I'm fun. I like to bring the unexpected into life and into coaching. And I think I also have a low threshold for boredom. So that play piece always keeps things fresh. And every single day of my life, I think about dying.
Mm.
And I don't say that from a morbid place. One of my first jobs was working in a funeral home. I had a summer job working in an animal morgue. Like, I didn't choose this stuff purposely. It's just life was lifing. So from a young age, it was something that was quite present to me.
Mm.
And I even have a thing on my phone, an app that is called the Final Countdown. So it's like counting down according to statistics, how much time I have left. So this idea of connection and awe and presence and fun and play, these are practices for me that it's not just something I think about now and again. It's a way I consciously choose to show up because it's a way of practicing life for me. So that's a really beautiful, gracious reflection that you've experienced me in that way, because that feels very in integrity with how I choose to be.
Oh, thank you. And absolutely. I mean, yes, I think of you as the playful Mandy because this is what you bring in our 4PC community for sure, is bringing some fun and delight. Now, actually, we were talking about our common friend, Jen Pastilov, and she brought this expect to be delighted. So I always have that sort of expectation. And I just suddenly realized you are such a generous gift giver. We both have April birthdays, and this is the one thing I am so in love with. So precious from you in terms of, it says audacious for anybody who cannot see it, but yeah. So for this particular purpose of this audacious conversations, as well as when I had the idea, and I think you and James, really, it was a dare. And I remember saying to you and James, if I were to do this, would you come on mine? And you both said yes. So I thought, that's it. It's going to happen. And it is just having these conversations with people that I love, they inspire me, and really exploring this concept of audacity in my definition of courage, care, and non-conformity. So if you had to pick one of those, which one would you pick? And let's play with it.
They all sound juicy, but it's kind of like looking in the box of chocolates and you're sort of looking at what's going to be inside of that one. And the other thing is we can always spit it out and put it in the bin if we don't like that one, right? We can come back to a different one. So the one that I'm drawn to is non-conformity. Let's play with that one today.
Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we set an intention, which is audacious about it, we didn't have a plan. We didn't have a map. So we just said we're going to sail wherever will be taken by the wind. So let's start with non-conformity, and then we'll see where we go to. So what's audacious? What is delicious, which I think is another one of your words about non-conformity for you?
I think it aligns with that practice and that value that I have of creativity. Creativity is one of my absolute core values, and I know that I'm falling into boredom and going into that place of going into kind of like screensaver face, like screensaver brain, when I'm not at the edge of stimulating or creating new ideas. And a lot of the generosity and that appreciation will come out of those creative pursuits. So that's just a byproduct of actually coming from that place. So I think living from a place of creativity means that I try not to get too comfortable with something when it's working. And one of the most brilliant books that I've recently read is by Will Guidara, called Unreasonable Hospitality. And I think this is such a guide in many ways, or the subtitle is The Remarkable Power of Giving People More Than They Expect. So although it is about hospitality and restaurants, it's really a way of being, of when we move towards mastery in something, it's so easy to stay there, right? Because of all the sunk cost, all of the efforts, and now we're standing at the top of the mountain, punching our arms in the air with the Rocky theme playing in the background, and it's so easy just to stagnate there. And I think this is what I mean. As soon as I get that feeling that I'm going into screensaver brain, I know that I'm losing an edge. I'm losing a feeling of aliveness. It's like the live wireness of life is slipping away from me, and it's becoming very comfortable slipper. And sometimes that's absolutely perfect because we need to rest and recoup energy. And sometimes it can be very seductive to stay there in a place of, I've created this is my niche, or this is how I show up in the world. And I like to actually constantly be pushing away from that once I've recouped and rested, but to constantly be thinking, how can I change this? How can I not fix it, but how can I play with this? How can I interpret this differently? How can I give this a new flavor? So this restaurant that Will Guidara talks about is called 11 Madison Park in New York City. And his aim was to take this middling brasserie and turn it into the top restaurant in the world. And as soon as that actually happened, this book talks about how that actually happened, all the ups and downs and the unlikely rise of this particular restaurant, and how they did it, that it was really about surprise and delight. Because to a certain degree, anybody can make world-class, well, not anybody, a lot of restaurants can make world-class food, but it's those little surprises and delights around the edges of it that truly give somebody an experience. And as soon as they became the top restaurant in the world, they then became entirely plant-based, refurbished the entire restaurant. And that's such a risky move because they could have sailed on that for some time. Now I'm talking about restaurants, but I'm actually not talking about restaurants. How often do we stay after a big win or after a big victory? How often do we sail and sail and sail there? And my piece around nonconformity is, when I've had a victory, when I've had a win, how do I reinvent this? How do I look at this differently? And that, I think that also takes courage to be able to do that. So there's an overlap in your Venn diagrams there of the nonconformity and the courage, because the easiest thing in the world is to run with a winning formula.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely, and in a way, you're right. They're overlapping. And what came to mind is, the surprise and delight, and all of these little extras. And actually, they're not little, because the little extra giving, as I call them, will really make a big difference to any of the experience. And you are again, I think I have also featured you in my last chapter of appreciation. So my book has got those 8 A's. And that's a very last one. And because you are what we call the queen of client astonishment. So again, great role model for us in the way that you do astonish your clients, your friends, including myself, with those. And it's very memorable. Actually, it's you can't easily forget when you have that thoughtfulness, and it takes risk. Going back to your story from the book, it absolutely takes a lot of risk to get out of the easy sail and start something else. And you reminded me when I had the conversation with James, so 8 conversations ago now, I just listened to a podcast where the definition, it was Jay Shetty definition of happiness, and he had the 3 L's, which was learn something new, launch something new, and then learn what you do. So it's the same thing about launching something new. When things do work well, as you said, taking that risk.
And the third C that just came in with this was the care. Being able to appreciate, astonish, requires care.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by care, active care for me, is listening, paying deep attention at a cellular level. And that also is a practice. I mean, coaching has helped to hone that muscle. But when we really listen to someone, when we really pay attention, we are all giving out clues all the time by the language that we use, by the attention that we pay, by the stories that we tell, by how we dress, the ways that we respond to things, the things that we value when we share with others. There's all sorts of tells happening all the time. And I think most of us have just learned how to listen to respond. And because we live in a world that is on jumper cables and it's ever faster, there's something about slowing oneself down to the pace of magic. And that's, I think, where the care is. The care is in listening with deep attentiveness, not listening to respond, but listening in 3D, with your eyes, with your senses, with the words, what's not being said, what's in between the words, and really practicing the care of deep listening, which allows you then to non-conform and think about new, novel, different ways of being with that information that you've just received. And then having the courage to potentially take some risks and implement or try or experiment with something. And I think once you start to live from that from that perspective as well, there's like a wellspring of ideas that comes up. It's not like you lay the golden goose's one egg and that's the only idea you're ever going to get. There's always plenty of new ideas to play with. And it's which ones feel implementable in this moment, which ones feel exciting, which ones feel a bit edgy, which ones feel like, yeah, tried and tested. They'll be nice, but they probably aren't going to be revolutionary. And I think it's you've really hit it with those 3 C's of there's so much play that you can build into those and creativity that can be built into those. So I think for me, it all stems from that deep paying attention and listening, and then allowing my creative brain to gallop around and think, oh, what would be possible? And there also often needs to be time. I mean, a lot of creativity can happen under time pressure. It's a time constraint can mean you don't have time to overthink. So sometimes a great idea, you can just pull it up like the carrot out of the earth, right? There it is, ready to go. And other times it's like the more marinating ideas. Yeah. So I think with your necklace, for example, I had a lot of different ideas in the pipeline, and all of a sudden it was like, there it was. But I couldn't rush that. One. And plus it takes time to implement and get it made and all of those sorts of things. But it's the nexus of those 3 things. So it just fits so beautifully into this conversation.
Thank you. And actually, you almost brought that 4th C, the creativity. But I wanted to go back to, because you're distinct, absolutely listening is part of the caring, and listening it's critical to any, any endeavor, a relationship. And I listened to a podcast recently. I think I mentioned to you just before we started at the weekend, because it's a very recent one. It's Simon Sinek with a family counselor or relationship counselor someone called Sean McBride, I believe. And he has a beautiful definition of love. He calls it smart love. So S stands for self-awareness, but it's your self-awareness of your own emotions. The M stands for managing your sort of emotions in a relationship and taking responsibility for that. Smart, SMA. A stands for awareness of the other person, emotions and feelings. And the R stands for reading, which is, I thought that's really interesting. It's, he goes even one layer deeper, reading the other person. So it's not just being aware, but reading theirs emotions and their moods and where they are. And the T stands for togetherness. But he has this distinction about it's not enough. I think the podcast is called Love is Not Enough. And so why he says listening is not enough as well is you need to hear, because a lot of people can listen, but they're actually not really hearing what it is that you are saying. And it's, for me, it was quite a bit of a revelation, because I thought, well, I've listened, but did I really hear? Because I can regurgitate back, so I can prove to you that I've listened, but did I really hear the message? Which means, do I then take it forward and do something with it? Which is almost what you said. It's a parallel world, the implementation, as you said, and you used this little example. But I think he said something like, of course, and I have that with my adult, with my teenager kids. You can tell them, go and tidy up your room, and they can listen and they can say it back. I go and check in a daytime. They really didn't hear me. So I just thought it was a beautiful distinction to make, that sometimes, to care, you really have to be intentional in hearing.
Mm-hmm. And you have to want to hear, right?
Yes.
Because I suspect the teenage children in both of our lives have no interest in, they're listening but not hearing.
Very true. Very true. But yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that is, but I also wanted not to lose that thread, the sort of the spaciousness, making space for some of this, which is what I think you alluded to, because that's definitely been one of my biggest challenges, is how do I make space for what's to come when I'm such an action orientated person, and I've just learned to constantly be in action, to learn that actually there is a lot of value in creating deliberate space. And you and I were talking about that, how easy it's, going back to where we started, how easy it is to get seduced sometimes by the busyness, by doing what it's easy for us to do, without then making space for the next level up.
I think it's this setup in the way that our society works in the Western world, that there is a constant encouragement, whether it's through technology to keep us hooked and in Scrollville, whether it is to focus on hitting the next target, getting the next promotion, getting in the glass box office, getting the next shiny thing, getting the next house renovation, getting whatever is next. I call this nexting. And I learned this, I went to hear a guy speak called Gelong Tupten, and he said that we have habitualized wanting. So even when we achieve the thing, the desire for more never goes away. It's never about the achievement. It's about the wanting. And I thought that was such an aha moment, that we are primed to want. We are primed to want, and therefore we move at speed to satiate the next hit of the wanting, even though we kind of know it's never going to deeply nourish us. So it's this being in this perpetual stone skipping over the water cycle of we just touchdown, and there's next. And it still feels empty. And so many people who I end up working with get to midlife and they're surrounded by all these shiny things, status, accolades, all of what success looks like. And yet they're feeling secretly empty inside. Like, is this it? So there's this priming for moving at speed, because that's what we've been trained in this system, that there's the next hoop to jump through, and that will bring us closer to there, wherever there is. And I think the thing with slowing down is it feels like it's moving away from productivity and success. It feels like it's going against so much of the conditioning that resting is lazy, or I'm other people will get ahead of me if I slow down, especially if that slowing down is like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to make a life decision, this reflection time. So when I'm working with so many people who in my practice have burnout, or they're getting close to burnout, or they might have high functioning anxiety or psychological exhaustion, or some of the steps towards burnout, it can be this fear, like a real physical fear of slowing down, and the body can almost recoil from this, that I need to be in perpetual motion, otherwise I'm not successful. And over time, this frenetic activity has become associated with what success feels like. Success feels stressful.
Yeah.
And it's the decoupling of that and actually realizing that some space is required, like letting that muddy water settle and really getting to that place of clarity, getting to that place of letting your nervous system get off jumper cables. And that might take some time. Is really getting to know, how do I make my best decisions? And how do we do this in a society that is primed to have us constantly moving at speed down the conveyor belt of success, though there's no there, right? I mean, that's for us to decide. And that, I don't know about anybody listening, but my best decisions come when I feel connected to my body, when I'm rested, when I'm hydrated, when I'm not in that reactive mode. And I think that's what that next sting is. We're always in this reactive mode. And to consciously take oneself out of that can feel like a risk to a body that is so habitualized for wanting, and to a nervous system that is so habitualized to being reactive. It can feel like it can feel like a huge risk to suddenly consciously switch gears to be in what feels like an abyss or in a nothingness. And that can feel like a threat. It can feel dangerous. So I'm saying that just to anybody who might be considering that, like, how can my best decisions be made from this place? But there's anticipating that turbulence that may come up when you consciously choose to slow down, which is why so many people don't do it willingly, and they, boom, have to hit a wall and get a diagnosis, or a relationship ends, or a career ends. Something will force, it's a forcing function to slow down. Consciously doing it, ooh, that is an act of courage and an act of, what was the third C, the one that I chose? Like,
Non-conformity. Yeah, it's not conforming.
non-conformity.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes. That's hugely audacious, actually, because I know so many people, including myself, who stopped because of a life event. And then we can all do that, to do it consciously, to really courageously have that moment of slowing down deliberately. It is very courageous, and it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And it's so the guy, Mo Godat, I think his name is, he wrote, I mean, he's the happiness expert, but wrote a recent book called Unstressable. And it's the same concept of success equals stress, that we have become so addicted to stress that everything, we're getting so rewarded for more, for faster. So, going more, doing more, going faster. And I think he's got a great acronym. If I am, now I will embarrass myself by not sort of remembering what he had. It's like the 3 L's. And I think the 3 L's was limit, learn, and then lesson. And again, sort of limiting these moments of just going so fast in a deliberate way. It's what he was, because we have become very, very addicted to stress. It's
And speed.
and speed. Yes.
And that has a purpose for sure. It's not to say that that's bad or wrong, but in this season of your life, is it serving you? And I think this is why certain things like a bit of boredom, a bit of, is this all there is? Looking at what you're tolerating,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the things that kind of suck in your life, and they don't have to be big sucks. They can be the little pebbles in your shoe, those sorts of things, and just getting curious, because that is such a great source of self-coaching as well. What
Yes.
am I tolerating? Sitting down and making a list. What am I tolerating? What am I no longer prepared to tolerate? And starting a dialogue with yourself in that way of that also creates a gentle forcing function
Mm-hmm.
without you having to hit a brick wall, of just being at choice of, if I continue to operate this way, and if I continue to tolerate these things, if I continue to behave in this way, I'll get a fairly certain outcome.
Mm.
And it's really about bringing that time to reflect, and that slow time when the muddy water settles. You can see things that you can't see when you're going at pace. It's like
Totally.
being in a high-speed train, like whoosh, it's just a whir. But when you actually slow down, you're like, oh yeah, there's a village there, and there's a boy on a bicycle. You see things. So it really depends. What do you want? What are you optimizing for? If you're optimizing for speed and productivity and to live in a frenetic state to give you a result, next, 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 that's the way forward. Again, it's not bad or wrong. It's just, is it causing you suffering? Is it giving you the result that you want? And if it's not, then maybe the way forward is to slow down, let the landscape pixelate a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
check in with yourself, and see if you can be in a different mode of making a big decision. I think some of the bigger life decisions are tricky to make when everything's a blur and you're going at pace.
Well, you're absolutely right. It is. And what do you? I mean, I love that. What do you optimize for? As you said, for me, where is the well-being, the wellness in there in the optimization? And I'm doing a lot of work myself right now into what do I need to let go. Is the letting go of some of the old ways of doing things, and that's uncomfortable. That's audacious to let go.
And if you know what you're optimizing for, if you're optimizing for peace, if you're optimizing for health,
Mm-hmm.
if you're optimizing for joy. Ooh, wouldn't that be audacious?
I
If you
know.
optimized for joy, at least brought it into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, probably a lot of us haven't thought about joy since we were about 8 years old, right? Like, if you optimized for that, what would that look like?
Yeah, and actually, to be honest, you just brought it into my consciousness because at the beginning of every year, I choose one word to represent the year. So last year I had abundance. This year was joy.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like, and I do ask the question: is this making me joyful or not? Is this, So, but to go deeper, optimizing for it actually, and then being the test: is this bringing me joy?
And it's using it as a filter, right? Just
Yes.
like the way that I was talking about those practices at the beginning, practice of connection, practice of knowing I'm going to die, practice of gratitude, practice of awe seeking. All of those things, they're called practices for a reason,
Mm.
because you never actually get to mastery in any of them, because the landscape keeps changing. We keep changing. The people around us keep changing and evolving, we hope. So it's one of those things, that those practices of optimizing for joy, that will look different now than it does 6 years from now. And maybe with what fits into your life and into your day, what would it look like to optimize for that? Even on, how do you include it into your life today? Just even having it on the radar is a
Mm.
win.
Mm. So what are you going to optimize for, Mandy?
I am going to continue optimizing for moments of connection,
Mm-hmm.
awe, gratitude, because that's a way that I can toggle out of feeling a little bit reactive, radioactive sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I realize when I have those feelings that don't feel good to me, I probably need to process them and let them pass. And then I remind myself that I'm also part of something bigger. I want to be
Mm.
consciously part of something bigger. And there's lots of different channels
Mhm.
to do that. Could be connection, could be looking at something that, or reading or listening to something that inspires awe. It could be sharing with somebody what I appreciate about them. So that's such a win-win of leaving a voice note or sending a card to somebody of thank you, I appreciate you so much for this thing that you've done in my life and this has happened as a result. Like it feels good to do it. It feels beautiful to receive it. And again, those I cannot stress enough that whatever your version of those practices is, it's a way to get them through integrated into your life as opposed to something that you add onto a to-do list.
Mm. Thank you. And I sort of realize I would love to keep, having a conversation, audacious conversation or not with you the whole day. But um, for you, that there is no doubt in my mind, in a way, you are the queen of appreciation. And I so appreciate you being with me today, as I know, we were sharing, we didn't have a great weekend, you more so than me. So, even more appreciating you still being here and choosing to be with me, even if it was difficult. And actually that's sort of promising and then keeping your promise. Where could people find you? I mean, you're already famous. I'm so appreciative and so grateful the way we just turned the tables, and rather than you having a guest on your very famous podcast. Where could they find you apart from Enough the podcast, which we know about?
Well, that's the place to come and hang out if you
Mhm,
like these
mhm,
kind of conversations. You can find that on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And I do post here on LinkedIn,
mhm.
mostly about businessy things, but I think the more kind of personal, exploratory, messy side of things, you can find me on Instagram.
Yeah, I know Instagram is your place to be, but I've seen you, and I'd love to have you more on LinkedIn. As Instagram, for me, LinkedIn is where I hang around a lot more than Instagram. So it's nice to be able to see, both sides. So absolutely, definitely. Um, well, thank you for being with me today, and thank you for whoever joined us. I wasn't able to see, actually. I don't know whether it was something, if anybody who joined us, but we should be able to see that later. Thank you, Mandy. Thank
Oh,
you.
such a pleasure. It's always fun to play with you. Thank you for asking.
Thank you
And
for
thank you for listening.
thank you. Yes, thank you for listening and hopefully hearing some of the stuff that we said.
Yes.
We'll be here. Thank you.